This video is sponsored by War Thunder. There was a time when some commercial airplanes were faster than those of the U.S. Army Air Corps, and military flying tactics were still significantly based on obsolete practices from World War I. However, such strategies would drastically change soon. In the late 1930s, Bell Aircraft presented the organization with a sleek concept, complete with a streamlined finish that made it look like a winner. The P-39 Airacobra was unlike anything ever seen before, and featured several innovations that marked a departure from conventional fighter design, heavily influencing future developments. The aircraft made quite the impression, and eventually became one of the most beloved fighters among pilots. However, it was not with the Americans that the Airacobra truly shined. The formidable P-39 Airacobra was the U.S. fighter that accomplished the highest number of confirmed kills in World War II. Now, you can take command of this iconic low-level interceptor, as well as over 2,000 other planes, tanks, helicopters, and warships by joining War Thunder, the online military vehicle combat game every military buff is talking about. Click on the link in the description below to experience your favorite modern warfare combat vehicles in incredible detail. Each one is modeled down to their individual components and displayed in realistic graphics and glorious 4K resolution that guarantees total gameplay immersion. And forget about the conventional health bar to display damage. In War Thunder, you'll be able to see every dent and detonation mark on enemy vehicles as you damage them. Wage war across platforms. Click on the link below to play for free on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and even on previous gen consoles. Here at Dark Skies, we love War Thunder's in-depth customization system that lets us apply hundreds of camouflage patterns, faction markings, and decorations to our P-39 Airacobra so we can fly in style, even in the most intense PvP battles. Take advantage of War Thunder's exclusive reward to our viewers by clicking the link below to register as a new player and get a premium tank, aircraft, warship, and a 7-day account upgrade. We'll see you in War Thunder. Signature style. On March 19, 1937, the United States Army Air Corps issued Specification X609 for a high-altitude interceptor. In response, Bell Aircraft submitted 2 designs for a new aircraft fighter. The USAAC selected Model 4, and by October, the service ordered a prototype. A single P-39 Airacobra was built and flew for the first time in early April of 1938. The model had some original features, like its fully enclosed Allison V12 engine, which drove a 10-foot drive shaft attached to the propeller gearbox at the nose. Oddly enough, the engine was positioned behind the cockpit, causing many doubts among pilots. This radical design decision was taken to place the engine after the center of gravity and increase maneuverability. Still, it gave the model a tendency to stall during tight turns and even go into a flat spin, something many pilots could not counteract. Nevertheless, it was eventually proved that the engine location was no more of a hazard in a crash landing than in a conventional array. Other features included automobile-type doors on both sides of the cockpit, which in turn had roll-down windows. But perhaps most noticeable was the type's tricycle landing gear, an innovation at the time, but a Bell trademark from then on. As for armament, the Airacobra was equipped with a 37mm T9 cannon in the nose, which fired through the propeller hub, just like the Bf-109. The fighter was also fitted with 2.5-inch and 2.3-inch Browning machine guns. Mistakes. The initial results were auspicious, as the aircraft was fitted with a turbo supercharger and could reach speeds of 390 miles per hour at an altitude of 20,000 feet. However, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, soon implemented several questionable changes of its own. To start with, they added more weight while removing desirable features, including the turbo supercharger. This turned out to be a significant mistake, causing the aircraft to fly a mere 368 miles per hour at an unremarkable altitude of 13,600 feet. In fact, it was not efficiently operable above 15,000 feet. Once the production P-39 was materialized, the fighter was relegated to low-altitude work, as it was incapable of fulfilling its envisioned combat role. Then, after a batch of 20 P-39Cs, the first mass-produced version was born. The P-39D had heavier armor, self-sealing tanks, and additional machine guns in the wings. Evidently, the excess weight hampered the aircraft's already poor performance. Also, while it was not the engineer's fault, the P-39 had a shorter range than desired. However, the flaw was not noticed until the aircraft was deployed to the Pacific. At the time, it was customary that single-engine fighters took off at a moment's notice and returned to a nearby base, and were thus designed as short-range aircraft. Despite its flaws, the Airacobra was noticed by several Allied countries. Soon, France ordered no less than 200 aircraft, but when the country was defeated and occupied by the Nazis in 1940, the British took over the order. The Purchasing Commission was ordered a total of 675 aircraft, with the intention of deploying them in dogfights. When the new fighters arrived in the summer of 1941, the British replaced the cannon with the 20mm Hispano-Suiza and the machine guns with Browning .303s. However, they soon realized that the fighter was slower than advertised, not to mention useless at high altitudes. Moreover, the fighter had a weak rate of climb. In October, after only 2 combat operations, the Airacobra Mark I's were retired from the front lines. Right fit. After the Airacobra's disappointing performance, the British refused the rest of the order. Those aircraft then diverted back to the US and were redesignated P-400 to separate them from the regular ones, of which 200 were sent to the Australian Air Force to serve in the Pacific. On the other hand, 212 British P-39s were reallocated to the Soviet Union. In a strange twist of fate, that's where the model would find its redemption. Almost half of the total production of Airacobras ended up serving with the Soviets, where the fighter was highly regarded, and even produced 28 aces, with at least 15 victories each. Namely, Alexander Prokryshkin and Grigory Rechlikov scored 48 and 44 wins respectively while flying the fighter. The main reason the Airacobra shone in the Eastern Front was that most aerial battles took place at lower altitudes than in the rest of Europe. What's more, engagements would usually happen at 15,000 feet or less. In contrast, the situation in the rest of the continent required the majority of US fighters to escort high-altitude bombers, like the B-17 and B-24, on long-distance bombing raids. Given that American fighters covered bomber squadrons from 30,000 feet or higher, most dogfights took place at considerable altitudes. Meanwhile, the Russian landscapes and geographical situation required much shorter ranges and distances, and the Soviet Air Force was not engaged in bombing runs like the Allies. The Soviet government acquired significant Airacobras, starting in 1941 through a Lend-Lease program. Much like the Americans and British, Soviet pilots were skeptical of the strange aircraft at first. Some of the issues included the aircraft being prone to spins, tail deformations under high G-forces, and the need for high-quality fuel only. However, unlike the rest of the Allies, the Soviets eventually grew fond of the Airacobra, and Bell specialists even traveled to Moscow to solve many of the problems. The Airacobra had finally found its home. Soviet service. When the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor in 1941, the US had produced roughly 600 P-39s. At the time, both the Airacobra and the Curtiss P-40 were the top American land-based fighters. In April of 1942, the fighters first saw combat against the Japanese, but the fighter proved to be no match for the Zero. Compared to the best contemporary fighters, like the P-38, Bf-109, and the Zero, the model developed a bad reputation, mainly because of its underwhelming debut in the early European conflict. The fighter soon earned the nickname Iron Dog because it could not compete in the vast Pacific arena. Still, Airacobras were deployed throughout the world. Despite its shortcomings, the P-39 served reasonably well in the Pacific, flying missions to defend Port Moresby in New Guinea and Guadalcanal. In addition, the type saw service in the Aleutian Islands and eventually supported the Allied landings in Tunisia, Anzio, and Sicily. Understandably, the aircraft was often tasked with low-altitude missions, such as ground strafing. The Soviets appreciated its ground attack capabilities, and in October of 1942, Premier Joseph Stalin personally asked President Franklin Roosevelt to provide more fighters, especially Airacobras. Soon, more than 50 regiments were equipped with P-39s. The Soviet pilots considered the fighter stable, provided that its center of gravity was in the correct position. They claimed it had good taxiing speed and visibility, and that it was hard to flip over the nose. It also had light control forces, and the pilots enjoyed the cockpit heater, a new feature for them. While the Soviets did use the aircraft for ground attack missions, the Airacobra also covered other roles. And despite the additional complication that the P-39 was extremely difficult to handle because of its engine placement, the Soviet pilots valued the fighter. Besides, given that parts had to come all the way from New York to the Eastern Front, there was a considerable supply shortage. Nevertheless, the Soviets cleverly maximized their resources by scavenging damaged P-39s to keep others airworthy. Ultimately, about half of the total production of Airacobras was sent to the Soviets, with no less than 4,773 examples. Legacy. The production of P-39s ended in August of 1944. By then, Bell had produced 9,584 Airacobras, half of which served with the Soviets, and many of which participated with the Free French and British forces. The Airacobra was always considered a suitable and decent enough aircraft for low-level operations. As the Aviation History Online Museum claimed, quote, "The Americans demanded the best fighter planes, and they got them, but the Russians used what was available and made the most out of what they had." Some claim it was a matter of training. German ace pilot Günter Rahl even expressed that, quote, "In capable hands, the P-39 was a challenge to the Bf-109 F and G models." In the end, perhaps the Airacobra's true legacy lies in the fact that it introduced many significant innovations that would be featured in later models, like the improved P-63 King Cobra, and most significantly, the first American jet-powered aircraft, the XP-59 Aerocomet. Thank you for watching our video, and thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring it, and extending an exclusive gift to our audience. Click on the link in the description below to claim your in-game rewards. New players receive a premium tank, aircraft, warship, and a 7-day account upgrade,